Hi there, folks. This is George R.R. Martin coming to you with the commentary. I am, of course, the author of A Song of Ice and Fire, the series of epic fantasy books on which the Game of Thrones program is based. And I also was the scriptwriter on this particular episode, Blackwater, which is our big battle episode, episode 9 of the second season, and also, I think, probably the most challenging and expensive episode that we've made during the first two seasons. But one that I'm very pleased with. I think it came out very well. The team really exceeded themselves on this one, and I hope you'll agree as you see it. Unfortunately, I was not able to be on hand when we were filming this, so I can't speak with first-hand knowledge of some of the stuff that went on during the set or some of the actual practical challenges that they faced. For that, you'll have to go to the other audio tracks by our wonderful director, Neil Marshall, and hear what he has to say. But I can talk about the battle as it was in the books, the battle as it was in the script, and of course what we see on screen, which is quite a lot. But as fans who know the books well know still not everything that was in the books. The battle in the books is a huge thing. It occupies like 8 chapters intercutting between 3 different viewpoint characters and has many elements that would have cost as much as a feature film to get them all on screen. So we did have to make some compressions, but still, it's a very demanding, very challenging, and very expensive, and I think gorgeous episode. So here we are opening in Stannis Baratheon's fleet as it approaches King's Landing through the waters of Blackwater Bay. There are actually 2 Blackwaters. The episode is titled Blackwater. There's Blackwater Bay, and there's the Blackwater Rush, which is a major river that runs to the south of King's Landing that flows into Blackwater Bay. The Battle of the Blackwater, as it occurs in the book, mainly takes place on the Blackwater Rush, that is to say, on the river. But here in the television episode, it's more the Battle of Blackwater Bay, and you'll see people talking about make sure all the ships are in the bay. And here we have Stannis Baratheon, and of course we've seen Davos Seaworth in the earlier shots. Now, Stannis and Davos are on separate ships. Stannis is on his flagship, the Fury, which is well back in the fleet. And Davos, as the admiral here, is leading the way on his own ship, Black Betha. We don't actually find out the names of the ships or anything like that in the TV episode, but book fans will know them. Davos is not actually the admiral in the book. There are various other characters who have been eliminated or condensed. Among them, Davos' sons. I mean, we see here this scene, which is sort of setting the scene and leading up to the battle between Davos and his son, Mathos, who is serving as his first mate aboard his ship. In the books, Davos actually has 7 sons. 2 of them are at home, are quite young, and are at home with his wife down in the Stormlands. But the other 5 are all with him. There are 2 sons, the 2 eldest sons, who command ships of their own that are sailing next to him. There's Mathos, who is his mate here on Black Betha. And there's also a 4th son who is on Stannis' ship, where he's serving as the oar master, and a 5th son, who's the youngest of the 5 with him, who is the king's squire, Devon. Here we're playing... Mathos is a very fervent convert to Melisandre's religion, to the Lord of Light. In the books, that's actually Devon, the squire, who's the one that has completely gone over to Melisandre. And now we're seeing the other side. We're seeing King's Landing and a lovely scene between Tyrion and Shay. I've run out of superlatives to say about Peter Dinklage. All of his scenes are marvelous. Of course, he won for the first season, his work in the first season. He won the Emmy Award and the Golden Globe. And I think if the gods are good and the world is just, he should be taking home some more trophies for his work this season, including his work in this episode. The vulnerability he's showing in the scene is just wonderful. Too many movies and television shows, particularly in fantasy, I think doesn't really grapple with the issue of before the battle, of fear. We don't want to see our heroes show fear, or at least there's a school of thought that they shouldn't show fear, but of course anyone would be afraid before a major battle. You don't know who's going to live, you don't know who's going to die, you don't know if you're going to come out in one piece. And Tyrion is no warrior. So of course he's sleepless. He's dealing with the fact that this may be his last night on Earth, and will he survive? Will he acquit himself well, or will he shame himself and disgrace himself, which is also an issue. Sybil Kelly, playing the character of Shay, also doing a wonderful job here.
No, Your Grace. It is not only the sworn duty of a maester to carry out...
Sybil is a German actress of Turkish descent.
To offer guidance and counsel...
The show's version of Shay is actually a significantly different character than the one depicted in the books.
A maester's duties become more...
People who read both the books and watch the TV show will have commented on that, and certainly it's something I've noticed myself. But I think the show Shay is a fascinating character in her own right, and Sybil has done a wonderful job of bringing her to life. And here, of course, we have Julian Glover as Grandmaster Pycelle, and Lena Headey as Cersei Lannister. And again, her performance in this episode, I think, is extraordinary. Huge range of emotions that she shows here.
Be
careful on the stairs, Grandmeister. There are so many.
Pycelle, of course, is just recently restored from the Black Cells where Tyrion threw him a few episodes ago when he discovered that he was feeding information to Cersei. Now, this brothel tavern scene is one of my favorites in this episode. I have to say, I get no credit for this scene. This was not in my script, and it was not in the books. This scene was written by David Benioff and Dan Weiss, the showrunners. The song they're singing, however, I did write. That's The Rains of Castamere, which is a song celebrating an early victory of Lord Tywin Lannister, where he destroyed House Rain of Castamere, who were bannermen to the Lannisters and who were getting a little rebellious. And Tywin destroyed them utterly.
Well, it wasn't me she was aiming at.
So this song celebrates that victory and is kind of the Lord Tywin is a badass, don't mess with him song.
Older boys. They won.
It recurs later in the books, in the third book, in several key places. But it's very nice to have it introduced here and to see Bronn and his people singing it.
You don't want to know about third time.
Poor no.
Of course, Bronn is actually Jerome Flynn, who began as a singer with an act that British viewers know called Robson and Jerome. I'm not actually familiar with their act myself, but I know they were very well known in the UK. And so the singing stuff came naturally to him here. But he does a marvelous job as Bronn. I love the casting here. And of course, then we have Rory McCann entering as the Hound, and there's this great confrontation between the two of them. Both very deadly men, practiced killers, but very, very different in their outlook and personality. And we see that coming to the fore here.
You think you're a hard man?
Oh, I know it.
Great speech by Bronn coming up here.
It's warm in here. We've got beautiful women and good brown ale. Plenty for everyone. And all you want is
A lot of fans, after this scene aired, have speculated about who would actually win between Bronn and the Hound. And it is fun to make these sort of speculations. Of course, you never know. They're both very accomplished warriors. In the world of Westeros, the Hound, Sandor Clegane, is far more renowned as a warrior. He's been the king or Prince Joffrey's sworn shield for years. He's one of the most renowned warriors in the employ of House Lannister.
And quicker.
While Bronn is a relatively unknown sellsword who's Tyrion picked up on the road, so to speak. But when swords come out, you can never tell who's going to win. So, will that issue ever be settled? Well, people have to keep watching and keep viewing to find out.
I expect you will someday.
But the tension in this scene I thought was great. And Bronn sneakily grabbing his dagger there. And then the bells come. One of the great things about working in television or film is you can actually hear the bells and you can hear the drums that come later, and the actual sounds add so much. I mean, as a novelist, a writer of prose, I can write in my books that a horn blew or someone began beating on drums, but it's hard to actually remember that. You read the sentence and you go on. While you can continue the sound of the bells all through this scene, you can continue the drumming when it goes on. It will always be there in the background. Your ears are really picking up on it. And to my mind, that adds just so much impact. It's one of the differences between the two mediums and one of the strengths that you have when you're doing television or film.
Do you trust him?
Oddly enough, I do.
Conleth Hill is Varys, another one of our amazing actors. The scenes between him and Tyrion all season have been incredible.
The map you asked.
And in the background, helping Tyrion dress, we have Podrick Payne, his squire.
Must be 20 miles of tunnels beneath the city.
Podrick is somewhat younger in the books than we're showing him in the series. And in the books, he's a bit of a bumbler. You know, it's almost a joke that Tyrion is given this somewhat inept squire who no one else wants. He's a distant relative of the King's Justice, the headsman, Sir Ilan Payne, but not from a very distinguished branch of the family. And his earlier knights that he was served have been killed, so he's sort of dumped on Tyrion as, well, you need a squire, we'll give you this kid. But the kid acquits himself quite well, as we will see in this episode. And although he gets a little tongue-tied, he's not the most articulate kid around, he's very loyal and has a lot of courage, as he shows here.
I think you believe in what you see, and in what those you trust have seen. You probably don't entirely trust me.
Don't take it personally. I don't entirely trust myself.
And yet I have seen things. And heard things. Things you have not. Things I wish I had not.
And you almost get the story of Varys' origin here, but not quite. Just teasing you. You can find the story in the book, though. Not in this particular place, but...
I will.
So the bells are still ringing. You can still hear them in the background there. And Tyrion holding the axe, a most unlikely warrior. But the city's defense rests largely on him. And great shot here. In the books, the battle actually begins during the day, but it does extend until night. And it is a somewhat different battle. There are many elements that we, unfortunately, for reasons of budget and shooting schedule, were forced to lose. Hear the drums answer the bells again. I love the pace that this gives the whole scene. Drumming begins on one ship and is picked up on other ships. Of Of course, we actually had only one ship. So the ship that Stannis is on and the ship that Davos is on, they are on different ships, but it's actually the same ship being redressed. And most of the other ships are special effects.
You'll be unstoppable with an axe. Don't get killed.
Nor you, my friend.
And here we are in the Paint Hall of Belfast, our amazing set where the throne room set stands.
Diminish our friendship.
Enhances it, really.
Oh, enhances. Fancy.
Bronn and Tyrion are, again, wonderful here. They play off one another very well. Here we bring in Sophie Turner as Sansa. This is really a huge episode for her. In the books, the battle is told through 3 viewpoint characters. Tyrion, who's on the battlements, Davos, who's on the ships on the opposite side, and Sansa, who's hearing reports from the battle from inside the castle. And I use a very strict viewpoint structure, so unless one of those characters are present, you don't see the scene. You only see what they see, hear what they hear, experience what they do.
Stay safe, my lady.
And you, my lion.
Obviously, in a television show, you can broaden that, so you can add scenes like the tavern brothel scene we saw earlier, which would never be in the books because none of my 3 viewpoint characters are present for that confrontation between Bronn and the Hound. This scene is pretty much straight from the books, although in the books it takes place outside in a courtyard as people are getting on horses.
Kiss it again when I return.
Horses, unfortunately, are expensive and tend to stretch your shooting time a lot because they don't always do as they're told and will sometimes do inappropriate things at the wrong moments, while actors usually don't.
Discuss battle plans with stupid girls.
I'm sorry, Your Grace. You're right.
Jack Gleeson, playing King Joffrey.
They say my brother
I have to echo everyone else on the show to say that Jack is actually a great guy and a terrific actor because he's made Joffrey into a truly loathsome reptile that thousands and thousands of fans throughout the world really want to slap. But please don't slap Jack if you happen to come into him in real life. He's a great guy.
Joffrey will. The worst ones always live. Come, my
Terrific dynamic between Jack and Sophie Turner. The whole look of this episode is great. Neil Marshall, I can't tell you how thrilled I was when I heard that Neil Marshall was going to direct this. We had another director was set to do it, but had a family emergency that required him to leave. So Neil Marshall came in with only like a week to prepare. And Neil, of course, is a feature director. Had not done television before, but he had done some incredibly terrific action sequences in features. The Descent, which I think is one of the best horror movies of the last 10 years, was his work. Also Centurion, a wonderful historical movie about the Lost Legion. So having Neil connected with this, we knew we would get some amazing stuff, and indeed he delivered on this.
Lancel, tell the Hound to tell the king.
Look at this little touch there, the Hound flinching away from the fire. That's the first hint of what will be an important beat here, which is that the Hound is afraid of fire. As a boy, his face was shoved into a brazier of hot coals by his elder brother, the Mountain Sir Gregor Clegane, and that's why he has those facial scars, those burns, and he's a little nervous of fire ever since. It's his great phobia. And, of course, he lives in a world that's lit by fire. You know, this is a medieval world where there are torches and candles and other fires anywhere. So he's learned to control the fear to an extent. He has to, but it still makes him a little bit uncomfortable, and he's about to get a lot uncomfortable with what's happening.
I don't know why she wants me here. She's always...
And now we switch to inside the Red Keep, the great castle. And this is the castle inside the castle, Maegor's Holdfast, where King Maegor the Cruel, who built the Red Keep, put a special secure fortress inside the castle, surrounded by its own dry moat lined with spikes with a drawbridge that can be pulled up. So even if the Red Keep itself is taken, this is sort of the last redoubt where people can fall back and hold out a little longer.
Yes.
Fitting, isn't it? The men will bleed out there and you will bleed in here.
This is where the Queen has gathered all the highborn ladies of the court
I'm not thirsty, Your Grace.
to await news on the battle. So essentially, this is the safest place in the city. They're protected by the city walls, and if Stannis gets past the city walls, he still has to get into the castle itself, the Red Keep, which is very formidable. And then he has to get inside Maegor's Holdfast, the castle within the castle.
Guards we have paid. The only way to keep...
Now this scene is, of course, Cersei is ordering the death of 3 of the servants who have tried to escape, and there's a certain harshness to it. But she's not entirely wrong in the explanation that she's giving Sansa, if you look at it in medieval terms.
Traitors are a danger to us all. More wine.
In many sieges throughout history, the deciding factor was traitors inside the walls, who at a certain point opened the gates for the enemy outside the walls. So when you discover traitors inside your own castle, or, people who are eager to surrender, or people who sympathize with the other side, there's a certain justification for dealing with them sharply. And, of course, Cersei is not about to hesitate on doing anything to protect herself and her house and her children. Now the appearance of the fleet is very dramatic here. And of course, one of the things the fans have brought up about the battle is where is the chain. In the books, Tyrion builds a great chain across the mouth of the river and raises it at a certain point when the bulk of Stannis' fleet has entered the river to prevent them from getting out again, because he's plotted the wildfire and he wants all the wildfire to destroy as much of the fleet as possible, not to be able to flee. And of course, the chain was probably the first element of the battle to be removed. Even before I started work on the script, Dan and David said, we've priced out the chain, we can't afford to do the chain. So the chain was never even in the script. It was the first thing to go. Earlier versions of the script did have some of the other elements that are in the book battles, such as the 3 great trebuchets called the 3 whores that Joffrey uses to throw Stannis sympathizers over the wall into the river. Those were in an early draft of the script, but again had to be removed for reasons of expense. Here's, of course, the wildfire, the ship with wildfire, and Tyrion giving the sample, and Bronn doing the honors. And gorgeous shot and incredible moment here, I think. Wildfire is my own fantasy version of Greek fire, which was the secret weapon of the Byzantine Empire that they used in many naval engagements, principally. The secret of making Greek fire was lost for centuries and was closely guarded when the Byzantine Empire was at its height. It was their secret weapon that their enemies did not have. And I'm not sure we really know how to make completely authentic Greek fire to this day, but it certainly contained naphtha and oils, and my wildfire is partly Greek fire and partly nitroglycerin and partly napalm and more than a little bit of magic, all colored green because it looks cool, you know? When you're working in the fantasy genre, I think you should ground yourself in history, in the things that really happened. But then you make it bigger. You make it bigger and more colorful. Fantasy is always a little larger than life. That's one of the things that characterizes fantasy. There's some amazing stuff that happened in that scene. Roy Dotrice, in particular, who plays Wisdom Helene, chief of the pyromancers. He does not have a line in this episode, but as the expression on his face, the lust and delight on Roy's face when he sees the wildfire go up, the eager anticipation when he hands Tyrion the torch, is just incredible work without even a word of dialogue. And similarly, Rory McCann playing the Hound, the appalled look on his face as he sees this fire goes up because of his fear of fire, and this is the biggest fire that he has seen, that anyone has ever seen in their lifetimes. And you have to remember, this is a medieval world. They haven't seen a million war pictures. They haven't lived through World War II or World War I with us. This is the biggest explosion and fire that any of them have ever known. The only real equivalent in my world is dragon fire, and the dragons have been extinct for more than a century. And now we are back inside with another
My queen. What are you doing?
great stuff between Cersei and Sansa.
Perfect, aren't you? Praying.
I think Lena and Sophie are both doing some of their very, very best work of the season, or indeed of the show, in these scenes. We have such a great cast. It's just such a pleasure to write for such good actors.
I should have been born a man. Stannis Baratheon.
Stannis, of course, is Robert's brother and was a member of the Small Council for a long time, so Cersei knows him well. And there's no love lost between them, and she understands Stannis's character as well, his rigidity, the fact that he is very unforgiving. So basically, she knows exactly what they're facing there.
Do you have any notion of what happens when a city is sacked? No, you wouldn't, would you? If the city falls, these fine women...
One thing that's not clear in the show, but is where Stannis got this large navy. I mean, Stannis was a member of Robert's Small Council, and his role on that Small Council was basically as the admiral, as the master of ships, as it's called.
Anything with tits looks good.
It was he that Robert put in charge of building the royal fleet when the Targaryens still held Dragonstone.
Just waiting to be eaten.
The Targaryen fleet was destroyed by a storm before it actually came to war, but from that day forward, Stannis has commanded the royal fleet, and that's why he has all these ships. That's why the sailors are loyal to him. The sailors and the captains have been largely under his command for close on 2 decades. And here's Stannis leading the landing fleet.
He's a serious man, Stannis Baratheon.
They're coming ashore.
Which again is something that was a bit of a change from the books.
Hound, form a welcome party for any Baratheon troop that manages to touch solid ground. Pod.
In the novels, Stannis is leading his land army, which is on the south bank of the river, across from the city. And the fleet is coming up the river to wipe out Joffrey's much smaller fleet and clear the way on the river so that the army can cross from the southern bank. Although there are people coming ashore from the ships, Stannis isn't one of them. He's watching from outside his tent on the south bank of the river, behaving perhaps more like Napoleon, commanding from the rear and giving orders. We've obviously changed this to the naval assault, with the entire army being on the ships rather than crossing from the river, and Stannis moving to the forefront of the battle. Stephen Delane, who plays Stannis, is another wonderful member of our cast. he has sort of a thankless role because Stannis is almost anti-charismatic. He's such a hard, rigid personality. Blunt and brusque and grudging with praise. Quick to complain. It's hard to like him. To capture that personality, Stephen does a very good job. Now, there is one thing here, of course. Stannis is leading the assault, but he's not wearing his helmet. Either is the guy whose head was just stove in.
Any man dies with a clean sword, I'll rip his fucking...
And the Hound is not wearing his helmet, which is a real pity because he has a particularly good helmet. And Lancel here is not wearing his helmet. Only the extras and stuntmen and day players seem to actually be wearing their helmets, which is something that I fear is true of many television shows and films where you see knights in combat. It's been something I've railed against for years. I always want people to put on their helmet because, you know, if you don't wear your helmet when people are going about with swords and axes, you're likely to get a boo-boo. You could get parts of your face cut off or your head stove into. Those helmets serve an important function. I learned that long ago when I was on The Twilight Zone in the mid-'80s. The very first episode, a script of mine that was ever filmed, had a nightly combat between two knights in an otherworldly setting. And they had no visors on their helmets, or at least one had no visor on his helmet, and someone zigged when he should have zagged, even though the scene had been very well rehearsed and they were fighting with blunt swords, but still metal swords. And a stuntman's nose was actually cut off, which served as an inspiration for a certain scene that comes up later in the novel, although it's somewhat different here in the TV show. Ever since, I have been one of Hollywood's leading advocates of put on your helmet, knights, and I fear it's a losing battle because directors like to see the expressions on the face of the leading actors, and actors like to have their faces be seen. And I am a voice crying in the wilderness, put on your helmets, guys. Please put on your helmets. So here we learn a little of Shay's background in this scene. I'm as interested as anyone because, of course, it's a completely different background than the background of the character in the books.
What's your name?
Shay is not from Lorath in the books. Shay is Westerosi born, a camp follower. So we've essentially created a new character here with some attributes.
What news?
An engrossing one, I think. And here comes Lancel to report on what's going on. He's been wounded. He has an arrow wound. There was a scene in the script where we see, you know, that the arrow is buried in his chest, and they can't draw it out because of the barb, and they actually break it off, so the point of the arrow is still in his chest. I'm not sure if that scene was ever filmed. It wasn't a script. Either it was filmed and not included in the final version, or it was never filmed. But Lancel does have an arrow in him, so he's performing pretty bravely here.
Now.
When I told you about Sir Ilyn earlier, I lied. Do you want to hear the truth? Do you want to know why he's really here?
And now Cersei is revealing that she doesn't intend Sansa to escape if Stannis wins. That Sir Ilyn will remove her head before that happens. This action stuff here is great, of course. This is the stuff where Neil Marshall really is just doing an amazing job. It's very exciting. And, of course, here we see the Hound's ultimate nightmare here, and Bronn comes to the rescue. A little payoff to their earlier confrontation. But nonetheless, that was the Hound's worst nightmare. Bronn is also not wearing a helmet. That guy wasn't wearing a helmet either. Had he been, he couldn't have cut his throat like that. This shot is, of course, the reason that they don't have the actors wear helmets, because if the Hound was wearing his helmet, you could not actually get all of that fear and the wonderful stuff that Rory McCann is doing there. And Stannis, without his helmet, is still leading the attack and raising the ladders to the walls, and is actually going up first. This Stannis is pretty righteous here. He may not be Robert, but he's pretty fierce in his own right. And again, this scene is pretty much straight from the books.
Fuck the water.
The only thing that's missing, of course, is the horses. In the books, all of these sorties that the Hound and various other knights are leading out of the city's sally ports are on horseback.
Iced milk and a nice bowl of raspberries too. Eat shit, dwarf.
The knight on horse, the armored knight on horseback, was the tank of the Middle Ages.
The Blackwater's on fire.
Stannis, landing his men from ships, can't have horses, so having a wedge of heavily armored men on horseback riding them down gives them a certain advantage in scattering the people who are coming ashore from the ships. But horses, again, are expensive, and they're tricky to work with. They immensely increase the shooting schedule. And also, when you're dealing with horses and fire at the same time, that's really... Horses don't like fire very much. Horses like fire even less than the Hound, I would suspect. So you introduce even more complications. I do miss the horses, admittedly, because I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to some of these medieval combat things. But I understand why we couldn't have the horses, and even horseless, it's pretty exciting. Now they're attacking here. The entire attack is centering around the Mud Gate, which is an informal name for the River Gate. King's Landing actually has 7 gates. In the books, Stannis is attacking like 3 of them simultaneously. He has a large army. He's attacking basically all the southern gates, so they have a lot of wall to defend. And a breakthrough at any of those gates, of course, would be disastrous, because then men would pour into the city.
If you won't defend your own city, why should they?
What would you have me do?
Lead.
I love the way Jack is playing this scene here.
You want to kill them.
What did my mother say exactly? Did she have urgent business with me?
She did not say, Your Grace.
There are notes here that's important to point out. Joffrey is afraid, but he wants to be brave. He wants to stay. He really is torn when he does this. As loathsome as he can be at times, part of him is still a young boy who wants to prove himself to be a hero, at least in his own mind. And he really doesn't want to be laughed at or ridiculed. And, when he says desperately, does she have urgent business with me to Lancel? Like, give me a good reason for going, is what he's saying. And, Jack does a great job with the expression in his voice. But, of course, Lancel doesn't give him that easy out. So he has to run away, essentially, with his tail between his legs.
Commanded you will bear the king's banner.
Men, form up!
I did, in the first draft of my script, have a helmet on Joffrey, and he was always lifting the visor, and Tyrion kept pulling down the visor and saying, "Keep your damn visor on. You don't want anything to happen to your pretty face, Your Grace."
And they're at the gates. There's another way out. I'm going to show you. Come out behind them and fuck them in their asses.
There once was a Super Bowl where Thurman Thomas, the running back of the Buffalo Bills, big star running back, couldn't find his helmet at the beginning of the game, so didn't actually start the Super Bowl game. Famous moment in football history. I have a feeling that it was like that before the Battle of Blackwater. None of the major knights or lords could find their helmets, so they all had to go out. And that's one of my favorite lines, even if I did write it myself. So here we have the unlikely. The Hound has disgraced himself. Some of the other people who were leading sorties in the books don't actually exist in the TV show. So it all falls to Tyrion.
Stannis' troops are at the gates. When the Gold Cloaks saw the king leaving, they lost all heart.
Where is my son?
I want to escort him back to the battle.
Why do I care what you want? Bring me.
Now listen to me.
I've had a few people ask me what happens there. Why does he react? And of course, it's because of what I was talking about earlier. Lancel still has half an arrow in his chest, and what Cersei just did was slam her fist into his wound, completely incapacitating him. But now Sophie, or Sansa, saves the day.
Run to your chamber.
And does what Cersei should be doing, which is, providing moral support to women and encouraging them and trying to calm their fears. I wasn't actually on the set to see this myself. There were a couple things this season where Sansa was beaten, where her clothes were ripped off her, where she was almost raped. Horrible experiences. I heard that through my sources on this set, my little birds, that Sophie had no problem whatsoever filming any of that. Very courageous young actress. But that she was terrified at the scene we just saw where she had to sing. So it's very odd. What will frighten some of us? But she's great here, as is Rory.
I can take you with me.
There's a line in the script that was cut, unfortunately, where Sansa says to him, "Well, how are you going to get out of the city? There are guards in all the gates." And he draws his sword and says, "I'm gonna get out with this, and no man is going to stop me." And then he sort of hesitates and says, "Unless he's on fire." I was sorry to lose that line. I rather liked that little moment, which emphasized the whole fire thing here.
Look at me. So you better get used to looking at them.
You won't hurt me.
Wonderful delivery of that line.
No, little bird, I won't hurt you.
In the books, he demands a song of her, and she sings that hymn about the mother again. Now the sortie, led by Tyrion with his men to try to break the crew that's battering their way into the castle. Again, in the books, this would have been conducted on horseback, obviously through a sally port, not through a secret tunnel. Tyrion, is wearing his helmet. That's why people say Tyrion is very smart. So he's the only major leader here who thinks to take his helmet with him into the battle.
Roll it over!
And more fire. But now he takes off his helmet. See, that he does that in the books too. And lives to rue it. But this is, again, one of my favorite moments here. Brilliant shot. And now the excrement city oscillator. And more Stannis in combat here. That guy really should have worn a helmet. And now Tyrion finds himself face to face with Mandon Moore of the Kingsguard, his own man, but that's why he's so shocked. The blow that he takes, and Pod comes to the rescue. It's slightly different than in the novel, in which the confrontation takes place on a bridge of ships. All of the ships crashing into each other during the naval portion of the battle on the river have formed essentially a locked-together bridge of burned and wrecked ships crashed into each other, and men are pouring across from the south bank, and Tyrion is leading his men to try to fight them, and gets assaulted on that one of the ships, and by Sir Mandon. And then Pod appears and just pushes Sir Mandon into the water, where his heavy armor would drown him beneath the river.
My lord. He could hear them howling in the night. Little cub was frightened. His mother said,
The cavalry to the rescue.
My son, you mustn't be afraid.
See, they have horses, so of course they're going to cut their way through all of the men on foot. As I said, the Mounted Knight was the
For one day, all the beasts will bow to you.
champion of the battlefields of Europe, dominated the battlefields of Europe for 1,000 years. And it was not until the English longbowmen, the English started grouping longbowmen in large groups, that that really changed. And we see some of the effectiveness as the Tyrells and the Lannisters and their new alliance come charging in. And this last scene on the Iron Throne with Tommen and Cersei, again, a great scene. My script is out of a version of it, but I have to give David and Dan credit for the actual dialogue in the scene is stuff that they've added on the rewrite, and it's much better than what I had. All the stuff about the lion and the beasts in the woods. And here, those who are paying careful attention will see that the knight on the white horse is wearing Renly Baratheon's armor, which we saw a few episodes ago before Renly's untimely death. So the soldiers in Stannis' army, those who recognize it, there's a lot of fear that it's Renly's ghost. And here we see Loras pulling off. It's not Renly's ghost, it's Loras Tyrell, who's been donned the armor of his dear friend Renly. And here comes Daddy. Just in the nick of time.
The battle is over.
And we have won.
We have won.
And the Lannisters have won. Stannis flees. That's his own men taking him off. And now we get a wonderful version of The Rains of Castamere, the song about Lord Tywin's first victory over the closing credits. But I think the real winners in this episode were me, who got the pleasure of seeing, my chapters and my script rendered marvelously by a cast as good as any on television and a phenomenal director. So, my thanks go out to all of our actors, to Lena and Peter, to Sophie, and the rest of our fabulous cast. Of course, to Neil Marshall, who stepped in at the last moment under very trying circumstances and did as good an hour of television as I think you'll see. And what I have to say is probably one of the best battles ever done on television in the entire history of television. And I've seen a lot of televised battles. Battles are hard, even in major feature films. So I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. It was a delight to work on, and I'll do another one next season.